we're still shifted forward in space. So instead of just undoing the initial compensatory strategy, we actually create a new one. Most people that struggle to move as well as they'd like have trouble coordinating the position of the pelvis and the rib cage. Regardless of your movement goals, learning to coordinate the position of the pelvis and the rib cage is a fundamental movement skill that will set you up for success. In this video, we're going to talk through what the most typical alignment strategy is, what the most common mistake that people make is when trying to correct this strategy, and a better solution. Then we'll bring you through activities you'll already be familiar with in the gym to allow you to see improvement right away. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. So to help us demonstrate this typical position is my buddy Mr. Phibbs. And what we're usually going to see is we're going to see an arching back that's happening here at the lower rib cage and a forward pushing of the pelvis. And what you'll notice is that the entire body is moving forward in space, so we have an anterior or forward weight shift in space. Now, depending on your physical structure, this might look a little bit different, but in general, these relationships are going to be present in most cases. Now, this relationship of the pelvis and rib cage tends to get reinforced in the gym because the reason we're utilizing this strategy in the first place is so we can get force down into the ground. So as force production demands increase, we'll just typically tend to reinforce this strategy. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this forward weight shift, but if it's our only option, then we'll tend to lose certain ranges of motion, and we'll tend to have our connective tissues behaving a little bit more stiffly. If we can then oppose this with strategies that allow us to recapture those ranges of motion and to allow those connective tissues to behave a little less stiffly, we're going to reap the benefits of having both the compressive and expansive strategies available to us that will allow us the maximum amount of movement options. This is a good time to remind ourselves that it's not trying to get one strategy being better than the other. It's that we have a spectrum of strategies available to us, and that if we have the full range of that spectrum available, we're going to tend to be able to move a lot better. If we can only represent one end of that movement spectrum, that's when we're going to tend to run into issues. So go after being able to do both, but don't go after one to the exclusion of the other. Now, the biggest mistake that people make when trying to oppose this strategy is that they're looking too much at the position of the pelvis and the rib cage in isolation and not as a result of the weight shift in space. So just to review, as we shift forward in space, we get this rib cage that extends back and this pelvis that pushes forward. Now, a lot of people look at this and they go anterior tilt to the pelvis, rib cage that's extending. So they think about posteriorly tilting the pelvis and flexing the rib cage. But what happens here is that we're still shifted forward in space. So instead of just undoing the initial compensatory strategy, we actually create a new one. If you're finding this video useful so far, consider liking the video, leaving a comment, or if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. This helps the videos get more views and helps us help more people to move better. Now, the solution here is actually going to be quite simple, and it's to consider that weight distribution in space first, and then allow the position of the rib cage and the pelvis to change as a result of that, rather than just trying to change the position of the rib cage and pelvis without considering that weight distribution in space. So if we're standing in this position, rib cage is extended, pelvis is coming forward, and we're forward in space, the first thing we do is we shift back in space. We find our heels, so we're heavy into our heels. We might have to unlock our knees a little bit, and we're going to think about relaxing this lower half of the rib cage, which is going to naturally allow us to sink down and back. The rib cage is going to come into a little bit of a flex position. The arch in the back is going to decrease, and the pelvis will naturally move back in space towards that more posterior oriented or posteriorly tilted position. So the really cool thing here is that if you're someone who uses that typical strategy, training under load with that opposing strategy is going to allow you to recover better from your workouts that require you to limit your movement options, and it's going to allow you to move with more ease in your day-to-day life. Let's go over how to apply this strategy in the gym by looking at a few common movements. Let's start with the squat. Now, when it comes to the squat, we have two tools at our disposal that are going to make it a little bit easier for us to achieve the relationship we want between the pelvis and the rib cage, and these are squat wedges and a weight. Now, if you don't have a pair of squat wedges, you can go down to my affiliate link in the description. These are squat wedges by wedgies or wedgies by squat wedges. Either way, I think they're the best ones out there right now. So both of these tools are going to help us to achieve that desired posterior shift or backward shift in space. So we're going to set up in this initial position on the wedges, and we're going to hold the weight out in front of us. As we reach forward with the elbows and reach the weight forward, that's going to allow us to shift back through the rib cage. Now we're going to be heel heavy on the wedges, and what we're going to find is that as we go down here, by being elevated on the wedges, we can actually go pretty much straight up and down. And what we'll find is this back part of the rib cage and back part of the pelvis can stay a little bit further back in space than if we were doing these without the wedges. Now the cues we're going to think about to start here are going to be reach forward with the elbows, shift the rib cage back, especially leading from this lower aspect of the rib cage. Get the weight primarily in the heels, and then maintain that relationship throughout the entire activity, coming down as far as you can comfortably, and then staying back even as we push down through the heels and come back up. Now the other movement that we can use to help with this relationship is a deadlift. And the thing that's really cool about this is that if you're someone who tends to position your pelvis really far forward in space, this movement puts the pelvis in a position where you can really open up that lower part of the pelvis that would tend to be restricted. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to choose an appropriate load, because with a heavy load we're going to be more likely to go into that extended position in order to produce force, but if we have a light enough load we can reinforce that opposing strategy. So we're going to hold our weight, we're going to get weight shifted back into the heels. We're going to think about an open lower aspect of that rib cage. We're going to actually lead with that part of the rib cage. We're going to try to maintain that open throughout. We're also going to feel the same thing in the pelvis, with the lower aspect of the pelvis coming into an open position as we maintain the weight through the heels and shift our weight back in space. Now from here we can take a nice breath in, feel this opening up even a little bit more, and then as we exhale we'll think about pulling the sit bone down towards the heel, staying heavy in the heel, and keeping our center of mass slightly back. Inhaling, coming down, shifting back, keeping this lower rib cage nice and open, then exhaling, pulling the sit bones down toward the heels, and returning to the start. So this type of deadlift variation becomes really useful to help offset the secondary consequences of doing heavier deadlifts. When you're doing those heavier deadlifts, you're typically going to be extending the back a little bit, pushing forward in space and using compressive strategies. This is going to help you to open up those areas that would otherwise get compressed during those activities. So in a really cool way, you're using deadlifts to help deadlifts. Powerful stuff. Okay, so to recap, when trying to improve the relationship between the pelvis and the rib cage, focus on achieving that weight shift first, and then allow the position of the pelvis and the rib cage to change as a natural result of that weight shift, instead of forcing the position of the pelvis and the rib cage without achieving that weight shift first. Do this and I think you're going to find that you're moving a whole lot better. As always, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you'll know when I upload a new video. If you liked the video, give me a like. If you have any questions, drop them down below in the comments. Until next time, peace.